Tag-along paced across the room anxiously, eyes darting from screen to screen, databoard to databoard, and as he drank in the entirety of the information displayed, his ongoing horror grew. Cathian had been located and rescued, and was currently en route back to Farmhold. But it was not by the brothers Caliber's actions alone was he extracted, as was the expectation of Tag. Master Sergeant Han, one of the Hands of Destiny, chosen by the Claw of the Nine Wings, was there as well, instead of with his team, many light years away. How had he been pulled into this, when his path had been so far distant, and deliberately so? A quick glance at the craft they were in, and the pilot allowed the final pieces to fall into place. The firstborn Analar Kanar, who had set the craft to autopilot while never leaving the controls unattended, was an ancient friend to Han, and the craft was clearly made by only one set of Kristan godling hands. Verisar's little touches were everywhere on the craft. That did explain how Han was contacted and brought back to the home realm without his team having to relinquish control and defense of the system forge. And, due to the myriad accoutrements and upgrades the vessel was sure to have, anyone watching the control station may not have even noticed its arrival or departure. But why had Verisar interceded in such a manner? A question for later worry. Tag-along's present worry came from the state that Cathian, another of the chosen hands, had been found and was still in. His limbs had been removed, but the wounds would not fully close, even under magical care. Without being there himself, Tag's best estimation was the missing limbs had been severed in such a way as to maintain an auratic link with the greater whole. As such, his body was trying to graft back onto those missing limbs, being convinced that they were still present and trying to mend itself accordingly. A nasty bit of work, and one that should be only possible with a rather rare training within the arts of the blue flame. The material that had been being extracted and created from him and his torment was a foul and addictive form of power, and vastly versatile in its potential destructive applications. In fact, it most likely served as the unknown base component to so many of the realm's recent issues in the areas of new intoxicants. Without the boy to now extract the material from, a grimace sat on Tag's face mid-thought. That would be the reason for his limbs being taken then. Properly preserved and utilized, the substance could be produced just as easily from the limbs, but it would be at a far reduced rate, limiting the supply and perhaps the reach of this vile product. Tag's grimace deepened, as even by his admittedly rough guess, due to the raw potency of the base substance, the final products were likely still going to be widely available, with even just 2 of the limbs being used this way. It appears someone had planned for if the boy was rescued, yet another worry for later. These were not issues to be pursued or explored right now, as Cathian's state was worse than his disembodied limbs still being used to propagate these vile toxins, as he was not responsive to any form of stimuli. In Tag's estimation, he had sealed his mind, or as much as he could, within itself to endure the constant months of torture, day in and day out, without breaking and becoming a madman, as clearly was intended. However, it appears the technique he most likely attempted was one of the more difficult and precise ones, and it looks like he had sealed himself far too deep within his own mind, and as such, no efforts thus far had been able to reach him. This shifted the grimace to a look of contemplation, as Tag considered how much effort and power it would take to perform such an act, even by accident, as the restorative systems on that craft could likely bring back the dead, but yet were unsuccessful in tending Cathian beyond keeping him physically at peak condition and free of pain or discomfort, perhaps minus the missing limbs, of course. It was not difficult to explain the scenario to one who was aware of the abilities of the flame, though. As he laid on the metabed, without even moving or even breathing beyond the shallowest and slowest motions of air, Tagalon contemplated the strange situation the boy had grown up navigating, how it had resulted in him now being locked away so deeply within his own mind. Cathian had gone his entire life with the understanding that he was a cripple in the arts of the blue flame, with no trace of even a favoring of either house or order. And since the boy had not felt the touch of a calling, it was not hard for Tagalon to sympathize with the boy's frustration with his apparent limitations. However, Tag knew better now, as he too had originally accepted the results of Cathian's hard training and semi-frequent self-testing. But upon seeing the levels of might Cathian was capable of calling on to protect himself in such nightmarish circumstances, and the way he used that power, it was clear he did indeed have a calling, but one so rare that it would make sense that no test would be able to discern it. He was a soul-hallowed coal of the flame, which was less of a calling per se, and more of an absurdly rare expression of the flame. With it, he would be capable of a great many things, and with far more power in both force and in reserves than even many masters of the arts of the flame. He was essentially a massive battery of blue flame, and once he was properly trained, nearly endless in his reserves of it. But more than that, the way the power could be expressed and used is unique to each of the soul-hallowed coals, much like a calling, and with Cathian's not having yet revealed itself, it was clear that it would be potent indeed, as these expressions tended to be fairly overt and blatant in their initial manifestation and use. So it was clear his, whatever it was, had not yet come to fruition. However, certain quirks of his application of the flame gave Tag ideas of what greater form the boy's power might take, as if only to its impressive might, if not to its rough shape. His constant training and ever-inventive ways of finding different uses of the basic and intermediary abilities and techniques of the flame arts that he could use to their fullest, and sometimes in ways that would go unexpected, had now been enhanced by the knowledge and wisdom contained within his armor. Fortunately for Cathian, the armor was bound to him on a cellular level, and would still be his to call forth, and would most likely end up serving as his mode of locomotion, even if the arm that once bared the gauntlet appeared to be removed, and was being possibly used to create more of this toxin. Combined with his gift, this most likely explained how he was even capable of the attempt to save his mind. And it seemed that it was very likely he had performed the act in panic or otherwise hurried, and thus played far too much of his gift that had not fully grown into an art he may not even consciously have been aware of being capable of. However, once he had grown fully in his gift, he'd be a fearsome force in and of himself. Perhaps he'd even be capable of giving Tag a run for his money eventually. This thought brought the slightest of bemused smiles to the corners of the Analar's mouth for but a brief moment. But only if he could be freed from his own mind. And with that thought, a scowl now settled on Tag's features, as he did not have a ready means to settle this issue without drawing undue attention and danger. Only the apparent forethought of Verisar had allowed these data links for passive observation to even exist in the first place, as the protection of that vessel would have otherwise shielded its passengers and interior from even the talents and skills of one so thoroughly trained and aged as the firstborn Analar that Tag represented. Even with all his skill and training in both the arts of the Blue Flame and the arts of the Graced Fist, he was but an observer to these unfolding events. Some other master of the flame, hopefully properly skilled and learned in the old ways, would step in if Cathian was ever to recover. By the 9 and 4, welcome to the library, and this semi-brief introduction to some of the concepts of the mysterious power known as the Blue Flame. In this entry, we will cover the general divisions of the expressions and uses of this power, as illustrated by the orders, houses, and their havens, as well as the callings of the flame. As my perceptive patrons, regular visitors are no doubt aware, but for the new guests of the library, this will be but a brief introduction to these forms of organization and their greater purpose. In general, I try to keep the information in these entries in a way to be absorbed without familiarity of prior entries beyond the basics, and this one should be no different. However, as we do cover the various orders and houses, references to individuals previously mentioned in other entries will be made for the sake of example. I, as always, encourage you to avail yourself of the extant materials of the library, and to not hesitate to ask any questions that may be provoked or of matters that are unclear. I am the recorder, and without further delay, let us begin discussing basics of how those who train with or otherwise use the blue flame organize themselves, of the houses and of the orders, and we will finish our discussion with the callings of the flame. It should be noted that the houses and orders, while a well-established and ages-long-standing rubric for classifying those with the talent, or have had unlocked the talent within themselves to call on and wield the blue flame, is still often a matter hotly debated in its details and application by academics and historians, as well as those who attempt to fully codify the practices of these erratic manifestors' most unusual gifts. As such, there is no agreed-on answer for the following questions. Which, between house and order, is the original form of the art? Which is the most powerful form of the art? And perhaps, oddly enough, who taught the original masters of the art? Or was this knowledge derived without such assistance? Of the two, houses and orders, the orders are typically seen as having the widest variety and versatility in how they can be expressed, manifested, or otherwise used. The orders are characterized by those who the flame can be used to produce effects in a particular manner or order. There are 5 orders, and while all those whose gift allows them to be shaped their powers along the paradigms and framework of the orders will find that only their inborn talent, imagination, and time will serve as limits to reaching the endless possibilities afforded within the orders. Each order is in relation to the others, and the expressed abilities and powers of members of the orders may contain elements and features of orders that are not their own. However, each order in which they will be able to function with the most ease and efficiency naturally, their personal order. Features or powers derived from orders outside one's natural order will never reach the same degree of power or efficiency as one performed by a natural of the order. We will be referring to the following image throughout this entry to help visualize how each of the houses and orders relate to one another. It is important to note that while one can reach outside of one's house or order into another house or order, one cannot reach from house to order, or from order to house, as these are fundamentally incompatible ways of viewing the use and application of the blue flame. On our chart, you can see the 5 orders and where they relate to one another, and also how much relative effort for effect can be expected by practitioners of each order relative to one another. Each step outside the user's natural gift along the edges of the image will see a reduction in potential of effect of roughly a quarter, with the exception of the direct crossing between the orders of the Forge and Auravator, shown as the blue line. For reasons most infinitely esoteric and not clearly or consistently understood, this passage sees nearly twice the degradation in potential as to any others. Before we go on too much further, let's go over each order quickly and to give you an idea what each does with the power of the blue flame. As we do so, Any practitioners of the orders that have made an appearance in previous entries will receive a mention as well as a bit of how they use the flame in accordance with the orders, both their own and, if appropriate, how they dip into the other orders as their needs require. Starting at the top of the image, we have the Augmenters. These are often thought as the most dangerous and potentially powerful of the orders in any sort of direct confrontation, as they are able to potentially turn anything into something far more dangerous and far more difficult to overcome. In short, they apply their flame-born power into enhancements, both for themselves and potentially others, when combined with the skills of the next order, that of the Senders. Augmenters can be anything from healers to warriors to a simple artist or other craftsman, applying their power to make their tools, weapons, or blessings carry a finer edge, a more fluid balance, or a greater effect in manifestation. Augmenters are indeed powerful, and of all the other orders, they are the best situated to create abilities and powers, combining different elements from the other orders. As far as exemplars of the Augmenter order, we have Tag-Alon, whose primary expression of the flame is that of his healing factor's incredible power and effect, able to reform flesh and bone, as well as the roots of the 36 binding wires fused to his bones, even from entropic destruction. His wires and his use of them are a great example of reaching into the skills of two other orders, as he uses the arts of the forge to extend the length of his wires and the weight from their natural length of only a few yards to perhaps as far as a couple dozen yards, while also utilizing arts from the Oravator's order to allow the weights and chains to be controlled as they are thrown, drawn, or otherwise wielded, allowing him to actively control as many as half of that total 36 at a time. Were he of the Order of the Forge, he would be able to increase his reach and range by nearly an order of magnitude more, at a minimum. If he were, however, a member of the Order of Oravators, he could control all 36 wires, their weights and actions, with all the natural ease of his own wings, instead of actively having to think and direct each one. Moving down the left side of our image, we next have the Senders, who are often and foolishly disregarded as merely blue flame-powered ranged weapons, as a great deal of people's experience with Senders will be of this kind, and often they leave a great impression of destruction or power. And this serves as the foundation for this common belief. Even the masters of the Sender orders will admit that this is really amongst what they are best known for and easily trained to do. But, in reality, any use of the flame by a member of the orders that extends beyond the wielder's own aura will use the arts of the Sender to achieve it. This can include teleportation and other forms of rapid transit or even communication. Of course, the Senders can be fully offensive long-range warriors, and in the role also excel as assassins and other forms of covert operatives, due to being able to get access to areas that anyone carrying a weapon or anything that would look like a weapon might not otherwise be able to, as they are the weapon, as is any wielder of the blue flame. Continuing down the left path, we reach the bottom and the Order of the Forgers, where the senders can allow their auratic power to remain coherent over distances away from themselves. The Forgers can create matter from the very essence of their flame, often as an object or series of objects with properties and abilities as envisioned by their wielder and dictated by their powers. Some merely create personal equipment or tools. Others can even copy other items and objects. As spoken with, Aztag's use of the Forger's art to manipulate the length of his wires, increasing the amount of something can also be achieved. For an actual member of the Order of the Forge, we have Optor in Sorte, who creates small scrolls in which he can preload a series of spells, blessings, or other powers he has the ability to cast, to have each activated in accordance to the special instructions Optor inscribes along with the spell and the power to activate it, much like the codesmiths of the Teltekians. Furthermore, he has learned to create wax-like seals to attach his script scrolls to objects or even other people to allow the beneficial spells on them to enjoy a much longer duration and even multiple uses, without depleting the power of the scroll. However, if a script scroll is not affixed thusly, or if it is overused, it will burn out, requiring Optor to spend hours recreating it, prescribing new spells and instructions, as well as crafting a new seal. Moving back to the top and going down the right side of our image now, we have the Aura Chemists, who, like the Forgers we just spoke of, are capable of changing their aura, or blue flame, giving it properties and characteristics of something else, and even things that might otherwise not seem to be able to coexist naturally, sometimes having multiple uses or states. And while the energy may seem to have a real and physical presence and even properties thereof, it is a massless and only energy, without the power and arts of the Order of the Forge. Many of their abilities appear to be more like traditional forms of magic, as they are often converting their energies into power in offensive ways that is very similar to how magic appears when used. Continuing to our final order, that of the Auravator, those who use their flame to move other things and even people to action under the direction and control of the Auravator. This can be as benign as allowing a wagon or other cart to move without a pull animal, to as nefarious as shifting the minds and wills to other to your cause and view. In most cases, contact with the target to be so manipulated is required to be made and often maintained, although this can be accomplished via proxy objects created by the Auravator for the task. So far, the only Auravator to make any notable appearance has not made his powers seen on camera for us to examine. However, Nick Amar is known to be of the Order of Auravators. His dozens of zealotous personal guard of Dragon Knights, to whom he is their very salvation, as well as the font of their power and ability. How much of these claims by those very knights is true, and how much is the manipulations, flame-powered or not, of Nick Amar, we may never know. Before moving to discuss the houses in more detail, it is important to note that most blue flame wielders who are of the orders will only have a limited set of powers, and they will often all be connected in theme, function, or in some logic that will apply to that person in question, many times acting to bolster another power within the set, as with Optor's wax seals. So while the variety of shapes, applications, and other attributes possible within the orders is far greater than those typically enjoyed by the houses, this comes at the cost of potency, where a member of the orders can conceivably be capable of the exact same feats that a member of a house would. In most cases, they will find themselves simply outmuscled by a member of the house doing those same acts, as it is more efficient and natural for them. Far simpler in explanation than the orders, the houses are each aligned with and make use of one of either the primary or secondary elements found within nature, being earth, fire, air, water, with magma, thunder, fog, and finally clay between the four major elements, as illustrated in our image. Within the purview of a house, a wielder of the blue flame can mold, shape, call forth, and otherwise utilize the element in question in nearly any way they can imagine with enough practice. Using their power to increase the amount of the element present and turning it to their intended ends happens with far more ease, flexibility, and potency than a member of the orders attempting to replicate similar feats. However, this increase comes at the much enhanced degradation of potential for trying to extend one's reach beyond one's natural house, as compared to the roughly quarter loss in potential and potency experienced by members of the order for similarly going outside of their own natures. A member of a house can expect to see drops in efficiency of roughly a third or more for the first step outside their house, and only the rarest of practitioners could ever think of going 2 steps beyond their houses for anything other than supplementary utility or bragging rights. Legendary grandmasters of yore were able to prove their status by performing minor workings with a house as far as 3 steps away, where it is said at best they may have been able to eke out as much as a sliver of the potential of their native and natural house's element. Further discouraging a practitioner from venturing too far from his own house are the havens, these being specializations or refined applications of the abilities and talents of each house, and thus requiring the focus and dedication of mastering one's own house to begin properly attempting to study and learn. Each house has at least one haven, and many possibly more. However, beyond the havens that each is actually best known for, these tend to be extraordinarily niche and are only practiced by the most learned or insane of house members. Beginning with fire, we first see the Haven of Plasma. Seekers of this haven can create, control, and unleash bursts, streams, and other forms and shapes of super-energized gases as a weapon or tool. Continuing clockwise, Jastique of Farmhold, as a member of the House of Thunder, could choose to seek the Haven of Tempests, whose powers of weather manipulation can see entire regions affected by heavy rains, thunder, lightning storms, accompanied by all the winds and potentially tornadoes that are normally associated with such storms. The House of Air sees the haven of gases, which allow its seekers to filter and manipulate the very components of air itself. The ability to refresh or taint the air deep underground, or to condense and detonate particular fumes within it as a weapon or tool. All of these and more are applications of this haven. Members of the House of Fog, such as Lassen of Farmhold, can seek the haven of blizzards, and thusly call forth and direct their own storms, much like the haven of tempests. But where the storms of tempest will see rain and lightning accompanied by massive winds and possibly tornadoes, the haven of blizzards brings forth the chill embrace of Arctic gales, with feet of snow and ice falling from the sky without mercy or relent. Seekers from the House of Water often find the haven of liquids, which expands the already wide interpretation of what qualifies as water. Normally, this is only limited and hampered by extremely significant ratios of material also being mixed into the water, typically visibly or tactilely detectable. This allows a seeker vast latitudes in what now can be used when the power of their blue flame is brought to bear. Continuing clockwise around the image, the masters of the House of Clay can seek the haven of Flora, which sees their powers allowed to control and animate otherwise inanimate or mindless plant life. Often seekers of this haven are mistaken for druidic priests and can see the revitalization of crops damaged by foul weather or pestilence just by their passing. The wielders of the blue flame aligned with the House of Earth often aim to become seekers of the haven of metals, and with it, the ability to shift and utilize the refined forms of ore that are so commonly used in the modern realms. Many seekers of this haven use its arts to become masters in the field of construction and artifice, rather than a great warrior or a hero of any description. Concluding our look at the houses and their prominent havens, the House of Magma's haven of fame is that of the haven of land shaping. The seekers of this haven can level or raise hills, bend the course of rivers and the shapes of coastlines. Often these changes will be ponderous and subtle, denoted with massive bursts of transformation and rearrangement, at times seemingly random to all but the seeker performing the work. While the houses and orders cover the overwhelming majority of blue flame wielders, it is unavoidable with a power so tied to the manner and essence of individuals that there are those that do not fit in either order or in-house, whose powers operate on differing principles or accomplish feats that are not within the purview of either system. These are those that have heard the calling of the flame, and as such normally only have one ability, perhaps with subset abilities to modify or enhance its use. These powers, as mentioned, function or accomplish tasks outside the normal understanding and classifications. Examples such as prognostication into the future or psychometric analysis of a ruins of a dead city to see it as it was in its past, to the outright mimicry of powers of others, or the usurpation of those very gifts. Perhaps even granting the desires of another, or coalescing the essence of a region to bring forth the power of a genus loci. All would qualify as callings, and each is rare and often a vastly valued talent. From the wide variety of expressions found within the orders, to the focused application of the houses represented by their havens, and finally those who follow a calling with a talent that might fail to fit nicely into either broader category. The power of the blue flame is one that is vastly adaptable and capable for being used for nearly any end, so far as the wielder has the mind and will to apply it with wisdom and surety. While being near natural talent for the flame-forged humans of Damnitra, its power proves available to any and all that would learn to call forth the endless flame that is within all life. How the orders and the houses will continue to adapt and expand within the Age of Stars, and the new environments and differing challenges it presents, is an interesting area to a great many, both for the uses of exploration, logistics, and colonies, as well as for matters of control and conquest. And this is where the entry on the houses, havens, orders, and callings of the blue flame shall come to a close. I hope you now have a better understanding of these powers and how they are classified and categorized by the peoples of the realms. Perceptive patrons, regular viewers, and of course, new guests of the library. I, as always, have been the recorder, and I thank you for joining me in our explorations of the realms of Jam'mar, and for your time, interest, and your support of them. So, until you next make your way back to the library for another entry of Intro to the Realms, by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves, and each other. If you'd like to contribute to the further exploration and explanation of the realms, please consider leaving a comment, a like, and sharing the video around. I read all the comments and make efforts to reply to each. Thank you for helping to grow the channel, and know I look forward to each and every one of your comments. Other methods of support can be found in the channel's description. Thank you for watching,